Some of the best advice I can give to players is this. Learn the rules of the game. You don't need to know all of them, but at least learn the basics of how your character works. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine, but nonetheless, it has some pretty major consequences if you don't follow this. Far too often, I've been involved in games that grind to a screeching halt or otherwise go absolutely nowhere because a few players just don't know the rules of their character. Sometimes, even after playing the game with the same character for several sessions, these people don't even know where basic things are located on their character sheet. Then they fumble around with their character sheet and can't even comprehend what they wrote down, since they neglected to include important details of their abilities. Then, either they or the GM has to look up the rules for something, and our confused player doesn't think to write down things more legibly and sensibly, leaving the cycle to continue again the next game session, as they didn't really pay attention to the GM's explanation the first time. I'm not unsympathetic, I get it. Learning a new game can be a drag, especially if you're already familiar with one particular game. While one of the GM's roles is to be a referee, and thus they should know the rules, that does not mean that it's okay to have them shoulder the burden of knowing and teaching the rules to everybody. Especially if the GM is going to have to reteach the rules every single time the group meets up. Because the GM then has to spend time showing a player, in D&D, how to add a d20 to the proficiency bonus and the relevant ability modifier, or in World of Darkness, how to form a dice pool based on an attribute and skill and then count numbers of 8, 9s, and 10s. Or even in Hero System in GURPS, how to roll 3d6, count up the number, and then check to see if it's below another number. Time spent doing that is time the GM could be doing something else. I don't normally like to rant, and it's my philosophy that both the GM and the player are equally important to the game. There's nobody to set the stage without the GM, and nobody to act on it without the players. But as with any sort of mutualist relationship, both parties have to do their part. A GM can set up the most epic journey with a sprawling world that seems to come to life as they speak. Though, if the players don't or can't navigate that world, it's all for nothing, since the GM will then have to address that. Which comes back to my original point. Part of the player's responsibility is thus to learn the rules. Even the most rules-light narrative game still has some rules that need to be known by the players, and if the player simply doesn't learn them, they have no way to navigate the world created for them by the GM. On the other hand though, if a player does know the rules, it takes that burden off the GM, which allows them to carry on as normal. And if the players are comfortable enough with the rules, the GM could even introduce variant rules that would be more appropriate for different situations. Though all that is only possible if the player makes that first step, learning the rules so the GM doesn't have to teach them. It's partially why when I'm a player, if there's such a break where the GM has to explain something to a player, I'll usually have a sidebar conversation with the player next to me, where I can explain to them some of the other stuff that they can do, but don't seem to know about. Like one time in a D&D 5th edition game I was in, I was explaining to another player who was playing a multi-class bard and warlock how spellcasting works for him when you multi-class like that.